Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be going over how to make a memorable monster in any horror RPG you run. Before we get into it, I just want to say, if you want to grow as a game master or player, get all the latest tips and tricks, start now by bleeding out the subscribe button till it turns gray and lifeless. Welcome back, everyone, my legion. Now, this video might go on for a little bit longer than normal because this is a very big topic. I'm going to go over two major things. The first, most of the video is going to be all the important information on how to create any type of memorable monster in any horror RPG. The second ending bit will be based on Call of Cthulhu, and I will tell you how to use, how to make a monster using more statistic based ideas. So, to start off, when you're creating a monster, what do you want it to be? So what do we know about monsters in pretty much any horror thing ever made ever? Well, it's pretty simple. They need to be scary. There's a lot more that goes into it than that, but that is the first thing you need to understand that all monsters have in common, is that in order for them to be a true monster, they need to be pretty scary. Now, obviously, there are some non-scary monsters. Take Elmo, for instance. But in general, a monster has to be scary. Now, when you're creating a monster, the very first question you must ask yourself is, what is it? What is it called? All right? A name is very important, and you'll notice that strange names are often very useful in horror. Cthulhu, Yog-Sothoth. Most slasher films or very well-known horror films, you've got Freddy Krueger. You know, a lot of them have a twist, so they start normal and then end weird. Jason Vanderhees, they just all they've got a very interesting name. And that's pretty important. You need a good name. Second, you need to know what describes your monster. And remember, this is general beginning things you need to get into before you start digging deeper into the psyche of your players and how to get them to actually fear this thing. So you need to know, what does it look like? What does it sound, smell, even feel like? You need to understand your monster so well that you know what it does every day. You need to know where it comes from. Does it come from a planet far in outer space? Is it a normal person that has turned psycho killer? Because as you know, Call of Cthulhu can be used to stimulate pretty much any horror system. And then if you're using something like Dread, or there's a ton of different horror RPG systems. So depending on what you're using, you need to know where your monster came from. And a lot of times monsters can be made more memorable by making them more human. And that might sound a little weird, but take some of the most well-known monsters, Jason Vanderhees. You've got Frankenstein's monster, Dracula. Those are not aliens from outer space. Now, obviously, for Call of Cthulhu, things like Cthulhu, the entire idea behind them is that they are not human, and that's what makes them scary, which goes into the fact that Lovecraft was extremely xenophobic. So, which might not scare everyone. So one thing to do when you're making those type of scenarios is also have a cult. One of the things Lovecraft does constantly is have cults. And cults are run by normal people. Maybe they're insane, and some of them have deformities, or some of them have been blessed by their gods or monsters, but they're still human. And using that, you can add in the human aspect, because let's face it, people like to think they're the good guys in general. You ask anyone, they don't think of themselves as the bad guys. And you should know that from even the Joker, right? You've got the Joker from, and obviously this is a fake person, but the Joker thinks he's doing the right thing. In any version of the Joker you've got, he always thinks he's doing the right thing. It really doesn't matter that he's not, because he thinks that he is. No bad guy ever thinks they're the good guy. So humans, as a whole, like to think of themselves as good guys. That's a generalization, but in general, yeah. So when you see something of yourself in the monster, that's when it gets terrifying. When a monster when Dracula ends up personifying lust, for anything really. When Frankenstein's monster ends up personifying being ostracized and then wanting revenge. It's very clear how all these famous writers have constantly created monsters that had a human element in them to make you connect with the monster, which scares you more because you see something of yourself in it. Anyway, you also should, when you go to make a monster, you should ask yourself, what are people afraid of? Because a giant spider or a giant snake is scary. People have arachnophobia. That's one of the most one of the most well-known phobias of all time. Claustrophobia, maybe not for a monster, but having a character stuck in a room where the walls are closing in can be very scary. Have them go into a bout of madness and have them think the walls are closing in, But anyway, you should ask yourself what people are afraid of when you're going to make a monster. Moving on, you need to figure out what the audience knows about the monster. And this is very important because you don't want them to know too much. Monsters can and should be outside of our control. Completely beyond our control. Humans love to control things. We are all control freaks. We try to control our relationships. We try to control our jobs. We try to control our underlings. We try to control our siblings. We try to control everything, everybody, everyone, every aspect of your life. You try to control it. When a monster is completely beyond your control, when the guy in Dagon is sitting, he's run out of his drugs to make him forget about the experience he had, and then he thinks Dagon's coming into his room and he just jumps out the window. That's him continuing to try and control his life to the point of suicide, But he can't. He's being followed by what he perceives to be this creature. He can't control it. When a monster's beyond your control, it makes it so much scarier. Imagination makes monsters scarier. That is very important. That is essential, all right? Essential. You must understand that a monster becomes much more scary when your player fills in the blanks with their own fears. Because what scares you might not scare everyone, right? And even what scares everyone might not scare certain people. So when you describe a monster, you should never describe the entire monster. Sorry, I've written down a lot of this stuff. So the monster needs to be unfamiliar. You should not fully reveal or describe them until the end. And sometimes not even then, because that can leave a lingering sense of fear after the game is finished. There should be no % chance that the players can kill the monster immediately. They need to be unknowable, beyond your control, and you should not describe them completely. And you can see that pretty much any good horror movie, any good horror book, no matter what it is, it's not going to describe it for you. A perfect example of this is actually in a song called Call of Cthulhu, or Cthulhu, however Metallica wants to pronounce it, by Metallica. That song has no words. There are no lyrics to that song. The whole song is a melody. A haunting, scary melody about Cthulhu. My dad loves that song. He knows nothing about Cthulhu, and yet he got the idea behind the cosmic horror or whatever, and the evil within it, and the unknown quality of it from hearing that song, even though he did not know who Cthulhu was. He'd never heard of Cthulhu. He'd never heard of H.P. Lovecraft. He listened to that song years ago, And only now does he know. You know, when I started getting into it, I'm like, hey, Cthulhu is Cthulhu. You know, Metallica has multiple songs that have to do with H.P. Lovecraft stuff. But that's a perfect example of so it's taking show don't tell a step further. So that's a very famous thing when you're writing and when you're making really anything. You want to show, not tell. You don't want to write, this place is scary. You want to say, it's a haunted mansion. As you're walking up, you hear the creaking noise as you walk up the stairs, and zombies are groaning and moaning in the basement and stuff, you know. And you hear screeching violins in the background, blah, 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 blah. It's all dark and there's cobwebs. That's way better than you walk into the house, it's scary. You know, you show, don't tell. This is taking it a step further by show suggestively, not too much. Show a very tiny bit. When you create any type of monster and you introduce them to your campaign, you do not want the players to know anything about them. And when they know about them, they see little tiny glimpses. Another perfect example, because this is a very important point, so I'm trying to give you as many examples as I can. Signs by M. Night Shyamalan, right? That movie, and I mean, I'm not going to spoil, I probably actually will spoil it because I want to reference them again later, so spoiler alert for Signs if you haven't seen it. But in that movie, there are aliens from outer space that are making these, it doesn't really matter what they're doing. You don't see them. They're there, and you know they're there. And the music and the reactions, everything lets you know they're there. But you don't see them. For the first hour of the movie, you don't see them. Then the main guy goes into a cornfield, and he's looking around with a flashlight in the middle of the night. And it's a super long, drawn-out, tense, almost chase scene, which starts as slow. Then he starts running all over the place. Finally, he catches the smallest glimpse, and you see a leg. It's not even really a leg. It almost blends in perfectly with the tree stump, but it's just this one, it's a long stick-like thing that is already inside. Like, you see it for 2 seconds, blink and you miss it. You know, you have to pause it and go back and be like, what the heck? You don't see it. At the end, nearing the end of the movie, there's a part where they're looking at a news report and they see it. But it's all glitchy. So they still don't really see it. And it's blurry and it's in the background. Then at the very end of the movie, the alien attacks them. And you still don't see it. They see it, but the audience still doesn't. You see it in the reflections of things. You see its legs. You see it for like 2 seconds, but you never really see it. And that's probably to show, that's probably to hide the terrible CGI effects. But still, it's a very, very, very good example of how to build fear and horror in the minds of your players, as opposed to just telling them, oh, it's gory. Because gore by itself is not scary. Some of the movies that are classified as freaking gornos, you know, they're not really that scary. They're kind of like, ugh. But they don't terrify us because they're not real. At all. You know? But then a movie like M. Night Shyamalan's Signs. There are other movies as well. I'm trying to think of another example. There are a bunch of... I can't think of another example right off the top of my head. But there are a lot of different examples of showing, not telling, being much better than just starting off with a bunch of gore and explaining every little detail. Monsters should, however, have a disturbing capacity for violence. When you create your monsters, they are going to be motivated by something. That brings it back to my video on insanity, which you can check out. I'm going to put it somewhere in this video, probably in the cards or whatever. The capacity for violence that a monster has is in direct correlation to its motives. What are your monster's motives? You need to understand that. In The Color Out of Space, a creature comes out of the sky. and it's a color, and it goes into the water and corrupts everything around it, and then drains the life out of it because it's feeding. Very unique Lovecraft story, but it's motivated. The players may not understand what the motivations are because the creature's supposed to be unknowable to human beings, but you're just being lazy if you're just making a monster do whatever without any real motivations just because you're like, well, they're not supposed to be explainable. You need to know. As the keeper, as the game master, you need to know. What are your character's motivations? Your monster's motivations. Your characters too, though. Any players watching this, make sure you know your character's motivations. Anyway, another thing, and I've already really touched on this, but monsters are supposed to be unpredictable. While you know their motives, the players don't. And they will try doing all different types of things to get what they want. So let's see what else we've got. There should be a 0% chance that the characters can ever kill the monster in one hit. But the monster should be powerful enough to one-shot kill the players. Maybe it doesn't, but it should be powerful enough to do that. And you got to look at the strengths of your monster. That's very important. You need to know its strengths, and you need to know its weaknesses. So you'll look at... let me think. So Freddy Krueger can, manipulate dreams and make them real, right? So he goes into your dreams or whatever, and then he'll kill you in the dream, and then you're dead in real life or something like that. That's his power. Jason or whatever is super strong, right? And he can, just snap someone's neck just by closing his wrist around their neck, and then their head goes flying and stuff. They've got strengths. Cthulhu, and in H.P. Lovecraft's horror in general, his monsters have a lot of strengths. And a lot of times their strengths are unbeknownst to them, right? So so you think of Azathoth, right? The giant star, the demon sultan, I think is what Lovecraft calls him. When you look at how it's a star, right? It's a burning flame. It's a giant burning flame. If an investigator tries to summon Azathoth to them, Azathoth might come and be like, hey, what's up? Obviously, it wouldn't think that, Azathoth's supposed to be a drooling idiot, with Nyarlathotep being its brain, really. But if they summoned it to them, Azathoth just immediately, melts them to a puddle, and then evaporates them, and then they're just ash, and then everything in like a 50-mile radius is also completely obliterated by just summoning Azathoth. Azathoth didn't do anything. He's just inherently dangerous to human beings. That's what makes, him scary. I don't really think Azathoth is that scary. Nyarlathotep is way more scary to me because he has a human element to him, as I said before. Very important. But I digress. So, let me continue. Every monster needs to have a weakness. And a great example of a weakness is, again, signs. At the end of signs, they find out that water can actually hurt these creatures. And they use glasses of water, they use cups of water, and just spill water all over these creatures, and they are evaporating, and they're burning, and they're dying, these aliens. That was their weakness, water, right? Almost every, Dracula, a wooden stake to the heart. The weakness can be very specific. But there has to be some kind of weakness. Because if there isn't, what are you going to, how are they supposed to beat it? Because the players need to have some way out. And a lot of times for a successful story to be told, you need some players to win. You can kill off some players. But you should have one player win or at least escape. Not always. Sometimes a TPK is a great way to end. But a lot of times, it's not the most satisfying way to end for the players. Sometimes it can work. Not always. You need to have weaknesses, for your monsters. Because if they don't have weaknesses, then, that can make them scary, but again, that dehumanizes them if they don't have weaknesses. Then also, what are your characters doing? Are the players just there to kind of wait till they die? They should have hope. Because one way to make a real horror story is to put hope. One spark of hope changes a stupid downward spiral story of everything's bad at the beginning, everything's just getting progressively worse, and it all ends with everybody dying. If they have some type of hope for something better that they're working for the entire time, even if it's the smallest spark, that's so much scarier, so much sadder, so much more filled with emotion than no hope. There should be hope. There should be a weakness. There should be a way for the players to win. It's a slim maybe, probably not chance, but there should be a way for them to win. And if they figure out that there's a way for them to win and then they fail anyway, that's sad and scary. So, what else do we have? Let's see. Another thing is you can definitely give your characters weapons to fight the monster, just make them highly ineffective. As the player characters go after the monster and fight it and try to cope with it, they will realize that they can't. Even with their machine guns that they said they wanted at the beginning, You need to figure out what the monster wants. And that again goes into motivations, right? What does your monster want? What motivates it? And I think I already got into this a little bit, but let me expand upon it a little bit more. When you create a monster in anything, you want to know, what is it looking for? What is it looking to get out of this? What does it want? And that is a very important thing to figure out, because if you don't know what your monster wants, how can you roleplay it correctly? If the monster is hungry and it needs to eat human flesh, because human flesh is the only thing that sustains it, like a ghoul, right? A Lovecraftian ghoul, then it makes a lot more sense that they're running around eating people. If you just have a person running around eating people because you think it's scary, that's kind of dumb. You need to have a need so that you can roleplay the thing correctly. Monsters should be different than anything we've ever seen before and scary. Most monsters are terrifying in appearance. Sometimes they can be more human, and that's a whole different type of scary. But we're talking specifically about monsters, not insane villain characters, more monster characters. So they should be different, scary, things we've never seen before. They need to be dangerous. They need to threaten our personal safety. You cannot make, and that's where so many, so Stranger Things, right? We've got Stranger Things. Again, some spoilers in this video as I'm using these examples. In Stranger Things, the first season, everything revolves around one family, and that family's connections, their friends and stuff. Everything revolves around this family. There is some stuff about the town, but everything revolves around one family. One boy goes missing. His family and his family's friends, and then one other side plot that's kind of drawn into it because one of their friends gets killed. That season is in my opinion, this is my opinion again, but I think that the first season of Stranger Things is better than any of the following seasons. Why is that? Because in season 1, everything was personal. Everything was on a deep personal level with a small cast of characters. When you create a world, right? when you create any type of creative story, right, you need it to be small. Because when it's small, you can make it big. It's essential you understand this. When something is small, when you limit yourself to 5 or 6 main characters, 10 non-player characters, and even that to me is too much, but generally, and 1 or 2 villains, you are able to expand upon them so much more than if you have 20 generic non-player characters. 20 or 30 different non-player characters who each serve some small role and are all pretty generic and all have one descriptor. Instead, you can create multi-layered 3D, 4D, 5D characters, many dimensions to a character, their backstory, everything about them, their motivations, their flaws, and their traits, as opposed to just writing, they're here for this, and they have a nasal voice and are kind of annoying. They also have, you can add so much, you can expound so much more when you limit yourself to a smaller area. And that is what I'm trying to say is, things are scarier when they're more personal, because you can expand more upon it. So in the second season of Stranger Things, everything got bigger. We added 10 new principal characters, and we added a lot of new locations, even though it's all technically in the same town. Season 2, still okay. Season 3 just blew all the proportions up as big as they could, added world-threatening events, still in the same town. Now they've made the town way bigger. Now they've added politicians. Now they've added big corporations and stuff. Many, 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 many characters, a lot of whom are like red shirts who are there to die. But there are lots of principal characters now, lots of side characters, a ton of different villains and bad guys and antagonists. And everything just kind of got spread thin over too much. And now in this next season, I'm pretty sure and in the third season, they started going into Russian-related things. And now this third season's going to be about in Russia? They're going to go even bigger globe spanning now? The bigger they expand, the more thin their characters and dimensional characters are going to be. And so my point in saying this is, when you create a monster, you need it to be personal. Everything it does must be personal. The players aren't going to care if the world is in jeopardy. They're not Superman. They're not the Avengers. They don't care. They don't give if the world is in jeopardy. They care if their wife is in jeopardy, if their son is in jeopardy, if their best friend they grew up with is in jeopardy. They care if they are in jeopardy. That is what's important. If everything they've worked for their entire life, that is what you must attack. Threaten their personal safety, and you will scare them. When you create a monster, you need to make it memorable. You need your characters talking about it, your players, talking about it for weeks and months and years afterward, remembering it. You can a lot of times when we run scenarios of Call of Cthulhu, I think we need to make a book out of this, because a lot of times it should be made into a book. That's how well done it was, and the players do such a good job. It's crazy how when you make things a certain way, when you really pay attention to these very specific things, you can expand upon so much. I don't think I have time to do the statistics side of things, which is, if you have the Keeper rulebook, you can figure it out. I don't even know if I have the Keeper rulebook on me. So, yeah, I don't know if I do. That sucks. Oh, there it is. All right. When you're creating a monster for Call of Cthulhu, you basically need to just get out the stats, and you want them to have very specific, weird attacks. And you want to make sure that they are able to do ridiculously crazy things. For example, Yog Sothoth has 2,000 constitution, all right? 400 hit points. Now, think about that. in relation to the general 7 hit points of a normal character. Okay? 7 hit points. Okay? He has 100 magic points as opposed to the 10 or 11 of a normal character. Its attacks per round is 1. It has a few different crazy, ridiculous attacks. One's called spheres, one is called bolts. Spheres does permanent 3d10 constitution damage. Think about how big of an effect that would have. Then bolts damage is death within a 5-yard diameter. Only magical weapons may damage Yog-Sothoth. Spells, as many as it wants. Sanity loss, if you see it, it's 1d10 if you succeed on a sanity check, or 1d100 sanity points to see it. So, yeah. You basically just need to come up with the strength, the constitution, the size, the dexterity, intelligence, power, hit points, and then just go from there the way a normal character would be made. And you can find all different types of, like, just look at one of their monsters as a template for when you're creating stats. Again, though, as I've said a million times, I think the stats mean nothing. The stats are a good suggestion. The rules are a suggestion. You need to make the story what's important. So, before I go, I have one final thing to say about creating a memorable monster, which was brought to my attention by one of my subscribers. I think he's a subscriber. Let's see. Okay, Lars Dahl. I don't know if that's their real name or not. I don't know. Lars Dahl has been posting comments on a lot of my videos. Very, very helpful comments. I actually encourage you to go into the comment section and read some of what he has to say, because it's really good. So anyway, in my last video, they were talking about monsters. And so something they said made me think this could be really helpful to people. This is specifically helpful for those of you who are having trouble getting the right mood. And it's very simple, and they said it's a little bit surprising. And it is. And this is only for people who are getting the mood wrong. I think everything that I said is very important in general for all monsters. This is for a very specific scenario. The horror should be afraid of the player characters. This will give the horror an interesting tension. It needs the player characters to get what it wants. But at the same time, it would prefer to be as far away from the player characters as possible. That will help the keeper run the story at an optimal pace. When the player characters are relaxed, the horror makes its move to get them to do what it wants them to do. And when the player characters are alert and progressing the story themselves, that's when the horror keeps a low profile. He gives examples, but I just felt that's very good. It helps set a proper pace and will help with mood and making sure that everything feels creepy. And again, that's another good show of unpredictability, because the monster is probably a lot more desperate if it's afraid of the player characters. Now, obviously, in Call of Cthulhu, that might not be the best of choices for a lot of their pre-made monsters, but, you know, that's just a suggestion. A shout out to Lars Dahl. Thank you very much for all the support. Yeah. Anyway, and thank you guys for watching this video to the end. It was fun to make. Anything else? I think that's about it. You need to understand how to create memorable monsters in your campaigns because they're important. You know, your monster's the big bad of your entire campaign, a lot of times, unless they're a human villain. I went over a lot of things. If you have any questions at all about anything, I can elaborate on pretty much every topic I've covered today. So leave a comment below. Tell me what you think. And I will see you guys again soon. Yeah. Thank you for watching. I hope this helped. And please subscribe, like this video. Thank you very much. And 35 minutes. My gosh. Thank you very much for sticking around this long. Deathstroke 9 out. Peace.